The sun was barely peeking over the horizon as Judge Richard Harris made his way to the courthouse. It was another busy day on the docket, filled with the usual array of misdemeanors and small claims cases. Judge Harris was a man of routine, predictable, some would say to a fault. His life, both in and out of the courtroom, was governed by an unyielding adherence to order and discipline. As he entered the imposing marble building, he greeted the familiar faces of his colleagues and court staff. The courthouse, with its high ceilings and echoing chambers, had become his second home over the years. It was a place where he felt a sense of control, a stark contrast to the turmoil that had defined his personal life. Years ago, Richard's marriage had ended in a bitter divorce. His wife, Lisa, had left him, taking with her not only their shared memories but also the sense of stability he had once taken for granted. The separation had been acrimonious, marked by long, drawn-out battles over finances and property. It was a chapter he seldom revisited, preferring instead to bury himself in his work. Today, however, would prove to be anything but routine. As the morning sessions began, Richard settled into his role, efficiently moving through the docket. Case after case, he dispensed justice with a measured hand, his decisions met with nods of approval from the courtroom spectators. The next case on the docket involved a young woman named Amara Johnson. Accused of a minor traffic violation, she stood nervously at the defendant's table. Amara was striking, with a poised demeanor that belied the anxiety she felt inside. Her eyes met Richard's briefly before she looked away, her expression a mix of apprehension and determination. Judge Harris glanced down at the file before him, noting the details of the case. A routine matter, he thought to himself. A minor infraction, nothing more. But as he began to address the courtroom, something in Amara's face caught his attention, a fleeting sense of familiarity that he couldn't quite place. "Miss Johnson," he began, his voice carrying the authority of his position. "You stand accused of violating traffic laws. How do you plead?" Amara's voice was steady as she replied, "Guilty, Your Honor." Richard nodded, acknowledging her plea. He began to outline the standard penalties for such an offense, his mind still preoccupied with that nagging sense of recognition. As he spoke, fragments of memory began to surface, echoes of a past he had long since tried to forget. It wasn't until Amara began to speak in her own defense that the pieces started to fall into place. She spoke eloquently, detailing the circumstances that had led to her infraction. It was a story of unexpected detours and a momentary lapse in judgment, one that Richard had heard countless times before. But there was something more, something personal, that tugged at the edges of his memory. "And, Your Honor," Amara concluded, her voice trembling slightly, "I only ask for your understanding and leniency. My sister, Lisa, always spoke highly of your sense of fairness and justice." The mention of Lisa's name hit Richard like a bolt of lightning. He felt the air leave his lungs as he stared at Amara, the familiarity suddenly making perfect sense. This was no ordinary defendant standing before him. This was Lisa's sister, the younger sibling he had met only a handful of times during his tumultuous marriage. For a moment, the courtroom faded away, and Richard was transported back to those brief encounters with Amara. She had been just a teenager then, full of promise and potential. He remembered the family gatherings, the shared laughter, and the way Lisa had doted on her sister. Regaining his composure, Richard cleared his throat, his mind racing to process this revelation. He couldn't let personal connections cloud his judgment, but the knowledge of who Amara was added a weight to his decision that he hadn't anticipated. "Miss Johnson," he said, his voice softer now, "while the law mandates certain penalties for your infraction, I want you to know that I understand the circumstances you've described. Given your plea and your honest account, I am willing to consider a reduced sentence." Amara's eyes widened with relief and gratitude, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. Richard's decision was met with murmurs of approval from the courtroom, a testament to his reputation for fairness. As he finalized the proceedings and the court adjourned for a brief recess, Richard's thoughts lingered on Amara. This unexpected twist had reopened old wounds and stirred emotions he had long kept buried. He knew that the road ahead would be complicated, both professionally and personally. Little did he know, this was just the beginning of a story that would challenge his perceptions, test his resolve, and ultimately lead to a deeper understanding of forgiveness and redemption. Judge Richard Harris sat in his chambers, the recent encounter with Amara Johnson weighing heavily on his mind. It was rare for him to let personal feelings interfere with his professional duties, but this situation was anything but typical. He couldn't shake the image of Amara standing before him, a reminder of a past he had tried so hard to leave behind. As the day progressed, Richard found it difficult to concentrate. The courtroom buzzed with the usual commotion, but his thoughts kept drifting back to Amara and the startling revelation of her identity. His assistant, Janet, noticed his distraction and gently knocked on his door during a brief recess. "Everything all right, Judge Harris?" Janet asked, her tone filled with concern. Richard looked up, forcing a smile. "Just a lot on my mind today, Janet." "Nothing to worry about." Janet nodded, though she wasn't entirely convinced. She had worked with Richard for years and knew him well enough to sense when something was amiss. She decided to give him space, hoping he would find a way to sort through whatever was troubling him. Meanwhile, Amara left the courthouse feeling a mixture of relief and anxiety. The encounter with Judge Harris had been unexpected, to say the least. She had heard stories about him from her sister, Lisa, but meeting him under these circumstances had been surreal. As she walked to her car, she couldn't help but replay the events in her mind. Amara's thoughts turned to her sister, Lisa, who had always been a source of strength and guidance. Lisa had faced her own struggles, particularly with her marriage to Richard. Amara remembered the many late-night conversations they had shared, discussing everything from career aspirations to personal challenges. Lisa had often spoken about Richard's dedication to his work and his unwavering sense of justice, even when their marriage was falling apart. Driving home, Amara resolved to reach out to Lisa and share what had happened. She knew her sister would have valuable insights and perhaps even some advice on how to navigate this unexpected turn of events. As she dialed Lisa's number, her hands trembled slightly, a mix of nerves and anticipation. "Hey, Amara." Lisa's voice greeted her with warmth and familiarity. "What's up?" Amara took a deep breath before launching into the story of her day in court. She described the moment she realized the judge was none other than Richard Harris and how his reaction had mirrored her own surprise. Lisa listened intently, occasionally interjecting with questions and comments. "That must have been quite the shock," Lisa said after Amara finished recounting the details. "I can't believe you ended up in Richard's courtroom." Amara nodded, even though her sister couldn't see her. "It was. I didn't know what to expect, but he was surprisingly fair. It seemed like he recognized me too." Lisa sighed, her tone reflecting a mix of nostalgia and regret. "Richard has always been fair, even if things didn't work out between us. I'm glad he didn't let our history influence his judgment." The conversation shifted to lighter topics as the sisters caught up on each other's lives. Amara felt a sense of comfort talking to Lisa, her sister's wisdom and support helping to ease her anxieties. By the time they hung up, Amara felt more at peace with the day's events, ready to face whatever came next. Back at the courthouse, Richard continued with his afternoon cases, but his mind remained preoccupied. As the day drew to a close, he found himself staring out the window of his chambers, the weight of the past pressing heavily on his shoulders. He knew he needed to address the situation with Amara, but he wasn't sure how. That evening, Richard sat alone in his modest apartment, nursing a glass of whiskey. The quiet hum of the city outside contrasted sharply with the turmoil within. Memories of his marriage to Lisa flooded his mind, both the good times and the bad. He recalled the laughter they had shared and the bitter arguments that had ultimately driven them apart. He thought about Amara, the young girl who had grown into a strong, articulate woman. The realization that she had ended up in his courtroom felt like more than just a coincidence. It was as if fate had orchestrated this encounter to force him to confront his past. Determined to find a way forward, Richard decided to reach out to Lisa. It had been years since they had spoken, but he felt it was the right thing to do. He needed closure, not just for himself, but for Amara as well. Picking up the phone, he dialed a number he hadn't used in a long time. "Hello, Lisa," he said when she answered. "It's Richard. We need to talk." The following day, Richard awoke with a sense of apprehension. His meeting with Lisa was scheduled for the evening, and he wasn't entirely sure how the conversation would unfold. As he prepared for the day, his thoughts kept circling back to Amara and the unexpected way their paths had crossed. Arriving at the courthouse, Richard tried to immerse himself in his work. The familiar rhythm of the courtroom provided some comfort, but the underlying tension remained. He moved through the cases with his usual efficiency, though his mind frequently wandered to the upcoming conversation with Lisa. As the afternoon wore on, Richard decided to take a brief walk to clear his head. The courthouse was located in the heart of the city, surrounded by bustling streets and towering buildings. Stepping outside, he let the crisp air fill his lungs, hoping it would help settle his nerves. Lost in thought, Richard almost didn't notice when a familiar voice called out to him. He turned to see Amara walking toward him. her expression a mix of curiosity and concern. Judge Harris, she said, offering a tentative smile, I didn't expect to see you out here. Richard returned the smile, though it felt strained. Amara, it's good to see you. How are you holding up? Amara shrugged, her eyes searching his face. I'm doing okay, all things considered. I wanted to thank you for your fairness yesterday. It meant a lot to me. Richard nodded, appreciating her gratitude. You're welcome. It's my duty to be fair and just, regardless of personal connections. I am glad we could resolve things amicably. They stood in an awkward silence for a moment, the noise of the city providing a backdrop to their conversation. Richard could tell that Amara had more on her mind, but he wasn't sure how to broach the subject. I spoke to Lisa last night, Amara finally said, breaking the silence. She told me a bit about your history together. I didn't realize things had been so difficult. Richard sighed, the weight of the past pressing down on him once again. Our marriage was complicated, to say the least. We both made mistakes, and it ended up costing us more than we anticipated. But that's in the past now. Amara nodded, her expression thoughtful. It's strange how life brings people back together in unexpected ways. I never imagined I'd be standing here, talking to you like this. Richard couldn't help but chuckle at the irony. Life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it? I'm just trying to navigate it as best I can. As they continued to talk, Richard felt a sense of ease settle over him. Despite the complicated history, there was something reassuring about connecting with Amara. It was as if she represented a bridge between the past and the present, a chance for reconciliation and understanding. Eventually, they parted ways, each lost in their own thoughts. Richard returned to the courthouse, feeling a renewed sense of determination. He knew the conversation with Lisa would be challenging, but he was ready to face it head-on. That evening, Richard arrived at the small cafe where he and Lisa had agreed to meet. It was a quiet, intimate place, far removed from the chaos of their past encounters. As he walked in, he spotted Lisa sitting at a corner table, her eyes scanning the room anxiously. Richard, she said as he approached, her voice tinged with a mixture of surprise and uncertainty. It's been a long time. It has, Richard replied, taking a seat across from her. Thanks for agreeing to meet with me. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. Richard studied Lisa's face, noting the changes time had wrought. She looked older, wiser, but there was still a glimmer of the woman he had once loved. I'm sorry for how things ended between us, Richard began, his voice steady but filled with regret. I know we both made mistakes, but I want you to know that I've never stopped caring about you. Lisa's eyes softened, and she nodded slowly. I appreciate that, Richard. I've had a lot of time to reflect on our past, and I realize now that we both could have handled things differently. They talked for what felt like hours, revisiting old wounds and sharing their perspectives on what had gone wrong. It was a cathartic experience, one that allowed them both to find some measure of closure. As the evening wore on, Richard felt a sense of relief. The conversation had been difficult, but it had also been necessary. He knew that moving forward wouldn't be easy, but he was ready to take the first steps. Before they parted ways, Lisa reached across the table and took Richard's hand. I'm glad we had this chance to talk, she said softly. Maybe now we can both start to heal. Richard squeezed her hand in return, a small smile playing on his lips. I hope so, Lisa, I really do. Leaving the cafe, Richard felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years. He knew there were still challenges ahead, but for the first time in a long while, he felt hopeful about the future. As he made his way home, he couldn't help but think of Amara and the unexpected way she had re-entered his life. He realized that their paths crossing had been more than just a coincidence. It had been a catalyst for change, a chance to confront the past and build a better future. In the days that followed, Richard felt a renewed sense of purpose. The conversation with Lisa had provided much-needed closure, allowing him to focus on the present and future. Despite this newfound clarity, there was still one unresolved issue that weighed on his mind: Amara. Back at the courthouse, Richard continued to preside over cases with his usual efficiency. However, he couldn't help but feel a connection to Amara that went beyond their brief encounter in the courtroom. He knew he had to address this connection, but he wasn't sure how. One afternoon, as Richard was preparing to wrap up for the day, he received an unexpected visitor. Amara stood at the entrance to his chambers, her expression a mix of determination and vulnerability. Judge Harris, she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. I hope you don't mind me coming here, but I needed to talk to you. Richard gestured for her to come in, his curiosity piqued. Of course, Amara, what's on your mind? As she took a seat, Amara took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. I've been doing a lot of thinking since our encounter in court. I realize now that there are things I need to understand about my sister's past, and about you. Richard listened intently, his heart heavy with anticipation. I understand. It's not easy to reconcile the past with the present, but I am here to help in any way I can. Amara nodded, her eyes filled with resolve. Lisa always spoke highly of you, even after the divorce. She said you were a good man, and I want to believe that, but I also need to know more about what happened between you two. Richard took a deep breath, the memories of his marriage flooding back. Lisa and I had our differences, but there was a time when we were very much in love. Our relationship started off with so much promise, but over time, we let our differences drive a wedge between us. He paused, choosing his words carefully. We both made mistakes, Amara. I became too focused on my work, and Lisa felt neglected. We argued often, and our inability to communicate effectively ultimately led to our divorce. Amara listened closely, her expression thoughtful. It sounds like a difficult situation for both of you. I've always admired Lisa's strength, but I never truly understood what she went through. Richard nodded, appreciating her empathy. Lisa is a remarkable woman, and she deserves all the happiness in the world. I regret that I couldn't provide that for her, but I've come to terms with my failures. All I can do now is move forward and try to be a better person. Amara's gaze softened, and she reached out to take Richard's hand. Thank you for being honest with me, Richard. It means a lot. I think it's important for us to understand the past so we can move forward with a clearer perspective. Richard squeezed her hand gently, feeling a sense of connection that transcended their complicated history. I agree, Amara. I'm glad we had this chance to talk. If there's anything else you need to know or discuss, I'm here for you. As they continued to talk, Richard felt a sense of peace settle over him. The conversation with Amara had been cathartic, allowing him to confront his past and find a path to forgiveness and redemption. He knew there would be challenges ahead, but he was ready to face them with a newfound sense of purpose. That evening, Richard sat in his apartment, reflecting on the events of the past few days. He felt a sense of closure that had eluded him for years, and for the first time, he allowed himself to hope for a brighter future. The next morning, Richard received a call from Lisa. Her voice was warm and friendly, a stark contrast to the tension that had defined their relationship in the past. Richard, I wanted to thank you for meeting with me, Lisa said. Our conversation was long overdue, and it helped me find some closure. Richard smiled, feeling a sense of relief. I feel the same way, Lisa. It's important for us to put the past behind us and move forward. They talked for a while, catching up on each other's lives and sharing stories. It was a pleasant conversation, one that marked a new beginning for both of them. Lisa's surprise was evident in her voice, but she agreed to meet. As they set a time and place, Richard felt a sense of resolve. He didn't know what the future held, but he was ready to face it, starting with this conversation. One afternoon, Richard received an unexpected call from Amara. Her voice was filled with excitement, and he could sense that something significant had happened. Richard, I have some news, she said, her tone brimming with enthusiasm. I've decided to pursue a career in law. I've always admired your dedication to justice, and I want to follow in your footsteps. Richard was taken aback, but in the best possible way. That's wonderful news, Amara. I'm so proud of you. It's a challenging path, but I have no doubt you'll excel. Amara's voice softened with gratitude. Thank you, Richard. Your support means a lot to me. I've always looked up to you, even from a distance. Knowing that I have your encouragement gives me the confidence to pursue this dream. Richard felt a surge of pride and joy. You have my full support, Amara. If there's anything you need, advice, guidance, or just someone to talk to, I'm here for you. As they ended the call, Richard couldn't help but marvel at the unexpected turns his life had taken. The encounter with Amara had brought about a series of events that led to healing, reconciliation, and newfound purpose. He realized that life's unpredictability could be a source of profound growth and transformation. As he prepared for another day in the courtroom, Richard felt a sense of gratitude for the journey he had undertaken. It was a journey filled with challenges and unexpected twists, but it had ultimately led him to a place of peace and fulfillment. As the weeks turned into months, Amara's decision to pursue a career in law became more than just an aspiration, it became her reality. Richard watched with pride as she enrolled in law school, determined to make a difference in the world of justice. Their bond grew stronger, built on mutual respect and a shared commitment to fairness and integrity. Richard continued his work in the courtroom with a renewed sense of purpose. Each case he presided over reminded him of the power and responsibility that came with his position. He took great care to ensure that every decision he made was guided by a deep understanding of the law and a genuine empathy for the people involved. One day, as Richard was finishing up his duties, he received a letter. The handwriting was neat and familiar, and as he opened the envelope, he saw that it was from Amara. She had written to express her gratitude and to share an update on her progress in law school. Dear Richard, the letter began. I hope this letter finds you well. I wanted to take a moment to thank you once again for your support and encouragement. Your guidance has been invaluable to me as I navigate this new chapter of my life. Amara went on to describe the challenges and triumphs she had experienced so far. She spoke of the rigorous coursework, the late-night study sessions, and the sense of accomplishment that came with each new milestone. Her words were filled with a sense of determination and hope for the future. As Richard read the letter, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. Amara's journey had not been an easy one, but her resilience and dedication were truly inspiring. He knew that she had the potential to make a significant impact in the field of law, and he was grateful to have played a small part in her success. That evening, Richard sat down to write a response. He chose his words carefully, wanting to convey just how proud he was of Amara and her accomplishments. "Dear Amara," he wrote, "thank you for your beautiful letter. It brings me great joy to hear about your progress and to know that you are thriving in law school. Your determination and hard work are truly commendable, and I have no doubt that you will achieve great things in your career." He continued, "I am always here for you, ready to offer any support or guidance you may need. Your journey is just beginning, and I am excited to see where it takes you. Remember, the path to success is often filled with challenges, but I have every confidence in your ability to overcome them." As he sealed the letter and prepared to send it, Richard felt a sense of contentment. The unexpected encounter with Amara had set off a chain of events that led to healing, growth, and a renewed sense of purpose. It was a reminder that life's twists and turns, however unpredictable, could ultimately lead to positive and transformative outcomes. One afternoon, as Richard was preparing to leave the courthouse, he received an unexpected call. It was from Lisa, her voice warm and inviting. "Richard, I was hoping we could meet up for coffee sometime," she said. "There's something I'd like to discuss with you." Curious, Richard agreed, and they arranged to meet at the same cafe where they had reconciled months earlier. As he walked into the familiar setting, he spotted Lisa sitting at a corner table, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Hi, Lisa," Richard greeted her as he took a seat. "It's good to see you." Lisa smiled, her eyes reflecting a sense of anticipation. "It's good to see you too, Richard. I have some news that I think you'll be interested in." Intrigued, Richard listened as Lisa began to explain. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since our last conversation, and I've come to a decision. I want to start a non-profit organization focused on providing legal support to underserved communities." Richard's eyes widened with surprise and admiration. "That's an incredible idea, Lisa. You've always had a passion for helping others, and this sounds like a perfect way to make a difference." Lisa nodded, her enthusiasm evident. "I believe there's a real need for accessible legal services, especially for those who can't afford them. I've already started reaching out to potential partners and supporters, and I would love for you to be involved." Richard felt a surge of excitement at the prospect. "I'd be honored, Lisa. This is a cause that's close to my heart as well. Together, we can make a real impact." As they discussed the details of the nonprofit, Richard couldn't help but feel a sense of fulfillment. The opportunity to work alongside Lisa once again, this time with a shared purpose, felt like a full circle moment. It was a chance to turn past mistakes into a meaningful and positive endeavor. Over the next few months, Richard and Lisa worked tirelessly to establish the nonprofit organization. They collaborated with other legal professionals, community leaders, and volunteers, all united by a common goal to provide justice and support to those who needed it most. Amara, too, became involved in the initiative, offering her time and skills to support the cause. The organization quickly gained momentum, and their efforts began to make a tangible difference in the lives of many individuals and families. Through their work, Richard, Lisa, and Amara formed a bond that transcended their past. They had each faced their own challenges and had come out stronger on the other side. Together, they were building a legacy of compassion, justice, and hope for the future. As Richard looked back on the journey that had brought them to this point, he felt a profound sense of gratitude. The unexpected encounter with Amara had set off a series of events that led to healing, reconciliation, and a shared purpose. It was a testament to the power of forgiveness, the importance of understanding, and the potential for positive change. In the end, Richard realized that life's greatest challenges often held the key to its most rewarding moments. By embracing the unpredictability of the journey and finding strength in the connections he had made, he had discovered a sense of fulfillment and purpose that he had never imagined possible. And so, as he stood at the helm of the nonprofit organization, surrounded by a dedicated team of individuals committed to justice and fairness, Richard felt a deep sense of contentment. He had found his place in the world, and he was ready to continue making a difference, one case at a time. Subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories, or watch our next video. As the days turned into weeks, Richard and Amara continued to stay in touch. Their relationship evolved from a chance encounter in the courtroom to a meaningful connection built on mutual respect and understanding. Richard found himself looking forward to their conversations, appreciating the insight and perspective Amara brought into his life.